Hello, welcome to lesson 13.1A. I've entitled this video, Harding and Coolidge. This video, the first one in this topic, is going to cover pages 783 to 785. Harding and Coolidge. World War I had greatly boosted the economy. Europeans, and later the U.S. military, ordered vast amounts of supplies and equipment from American factories. The end of the war, however, brought cutbacks. Republicans regained the White House. When the war ended, more than 2 million soldiers came home and began to look for jobs. At the same time, factories stopped turning out war materials. The result was a sharp recession or economic slump. And now we can answer a couple of questions. Number one, what were the two main reasons the United States entered a post-war recession? Number one, you had these 2 million soldiers coming home looking for jobs that had been replaced by the women and Mexicans and other people that had stepped up. And secondly, we switched from a wartime economy to a peacetime economy, and so many of those factories were not going to be making as much because the war was over, and that led to the recession. And that leads us to question two, what is a recession? That is an economic slump. It's not as bad as a depression, but it's a bad time in the economy. Not as bad as a depression, but it's still a bad time. And you can see that on this line graph here. Notice the unemployment rates. When the war was happening, it was going down. When we entered the war, notice what happened. It dropped completely sharply. And then notice post-war time unemployment went pretty high until 1921. Next, I want to talk about the 19th Amendment. That is, the right of citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of sex. Basically, what this did is it gave women the right to vote. A landslide victory. The recession fed voter discontent with the Democrats, who had held power for 8 years. In the 1920 election, Warren Harding swamped his Democratic opponent. And here we see the election of 1920. You can see Harding took on James Cox. Notice they were both from Ohio. Notice the vice presidential candidates for both people went on to become president at some point. Calvin Coolidge would become president when Harding died. And Franklin D. Roosevelt is the third greatest president in American history. He's going to win in 1932. Notice the Electoral College was a crushing defeat. States won, another crushing defeat. And notice the percentage of voting. This is still the biggest percentage defeat in the last 180 years for a candidate since the election of 1820. And we can answer questions 3 and 4 and 5. Number 3, why were Americans unhappy with the Democratic Party in 1920? Well, voters were unhappy because the recession, and a lot of people are losing jobs, and they usually blame the party that's in office, and at this time, Woodrow Wilson was the president, so Democrats were blamed and Republicans benefited. Number 4, what was the 19th Amendment to the Constitution? That gave women the right to vote, and a lot of those women turned out for Warren G. Harding. Number 5, what happened in the election of 1920? Harding, the Republican, won in a crushing defeat. Here is an Electoral College map. And what you can see, and it's not surprising at that time in American history, is that Democrats basically won only southern states. If you remember last year in the Civil War, the Democratic Party was the pro-slavery Southern Party, and the Republican Party was the party of Lincoln. So it's not surprising that the states that Cox did win happened to be states that would be former Confederate states. For the top cabinet post, Harding chose able men who strongly followed pro-business policies. Andrew Mellon, pictured here, a wealthy banker, became Secretary of the Treasury. Mellon balanced the budget and lowered taxes. And these are two staples of being a Republican. Republicans generally like a balanced budget and definitely lower taxes. So number 6, what action did Mellon take? He balanced the budget and lowered taxes. Herbert Hoover became the new Secretary of Commerce. During World War I, Hoover had earned the world's admiration by organizing efforts to supply food to millions of starving Belgians. As Secretary of Commerce, he worked to help American businesses expand overseas. So now we can answer question number 7. Which leader of the Food Administration during World War I was selected to be the Secretary of Commerce? That's Herbert Hoover. So notice the climb in Herbert Hoover's political career. Leader of the Food Administration, here he's Secretary of Commerce, and in 1928 he will go on to become President of the United States. Now we're going to look at the next question. Number 9, we're actually going to skip number 8 for now. The word scandal, what does the word scandal mean? Well, scandal is an action or event regarded as morally or legally wrong and causing general public outrage. And so keep that in mind when you hear the word scandal. That's actually number 9. We're going to come back to number 8 on the next slide. The Ohio Gang. To fill most other cabinet posts, however, Harding brought in his old friends. They became known as the Ohio Gang. Harding himself was honest and hardworking, but the Ohio Gang saw government service as a way to enrich themselves. A series of scandals resulted. For example, Harding made Charles Forbes, pictured here, head of the Veterans Bureau. Forbes was later convicted of stealing millions of dollars from the Bureau. So think about that. He was stealing money from people who had risked their life in World War I. Not cool. So number 8, who were the Ohio Gang? They were a bunch of Harding's friends from Ohio. And secondly, on that question, why did they turn out to be the downfall of President Harding? Well, many of them saw their job as a place just to get rich for themselves and not serving the people. And their scandals would lead to the next slide. I have no trouble with my enemies, but I'll say darn friends, they're the ones that keep me walking the floors at night. So keep in mind, Harding was saying basically, he knows about his enemies, but his friends were the ones that let him down, and the friends were the ones that led to the stress as president of Warren G. Harding, and that stress made this happen. Harding looked upon Forbes's crime as a betrayal. When rumors of new scandals surfaced, he grew even more distressed. In August 1923, Harding died of a heart attack. Many believe that the scandals contributed to his sudden death. And so now we can answer question 10. What action did Forbes take as the head of the Veterans Bureau that became a scandal? Well, he stole millions of dollars for himself. And question 11. What happened to Harding in August of 1923? He died of a heart attack. After Harding died, new scandals came to light. The most serious involved Secretary of the Interior Albert Fall. 2 oil executives had bribed Fall. In return, he secretly leased them government land in California and at Teapot Dome, Wyoming. As a result of the Teapot Dome scandal, Fall became the first cabinet official ever sent to prison. So what was the Teapot Dome scandal? Well, this was where our Secretary of the Interior basically used his job to make money for himself by giving land to people he shouldn't have given it to. It was government land so they could drill oil. And I can show you a little bit here. So here's Secretary of the Interior Albert Fall, and here are the 2 people that are interested in drilling for oil. And they say, yo, Albert buddy, how about letting Edward and I drill for oil at Elk Hills and Teapot Dome? And then Secretary Hall says, oh, but that's naval property. You can't drill there. And then Mr. O'Haney says, hey, how about $100,000? Would that help you change your mind? Oh, why didn't you say so, Ed? You've got a deal. And that's the kind of deal making that led to Secretary of the Interior Albert Fall going to jail. Coolidge becomes president. On the day Harding died, Vice President Calvin Coolidge was visiting his father's farm in Vermont. Coolidge recalled, I was awakened by my father. I noticed that his voice trembled. Coolidge's father, a justice of the peace, used the family Bible to swear his son in as president. Let's talk a little bit about Silent Cal, Calvin Coolidge. He was born on July 4th, 1872. As such, he's the only president who was ever born on the 4th of July. His mother died when he was only 12. He married his wife Grace in 1905. The phrase opposites attract is true in their case because Grace was talkative and loved to have a good time. Early in their marriage, Silent Cal handed her a bag full of 52 pairs of socks. All the socks had holes in them. She replied, "Did you marry me to mend all your socks?" In his usual serious manner, and without cracking a smile, Coolidge answered Grace with, "No, but I find it mighty handy." That's a very dry wit. Another story about Silent Cal. He was known for that dry wit. His wife Grace told a story once about a dinner party. Dorothy Parker, pictured here, was sitting next to Calvin Coolidge. She whispered to him, "Mr. Coolidge, I've made a bet against a fellow who said it was impossible to get more than 2 words out of you." And what did Calvin Coolidge say in response? "You lose." Once again, the dry wit of Calvin Coolidge. A couple more things about Silent Cal. When asked why he attended so many Washington, D.C. dinner parties, which he looked uncomfortable attending, Coolidge replied, "Well, I gotta eat somewhere." He once told a lady, "I think the American people want a solemn gluteus maximus as a president, and I think I will go along with them." And Calvin Coolidge died in 1933. When Dorothy Parker, that we talked about earlier, heard about Coolidge's death, she responded, "How could they tell?" That's my favorite. Silent Cal Coolidge was very different from Harding. Harding loved throwing parties and making long speeches. Coolidge was tight with both money and words. A woman reportedly told Coolidge that she bet that she could get him to say more than 2 words. "You lose," Coolidge replied. And here we see the difference between Harding and Coolidge. Harding loved to throw parties. Coolidge was very close-lipped, a man of few words. Coolidge set out to repair the damage caused by the scandals. He forced the officials involved in scandals to resign. In 1924, Coolidge ran against Democrat John Davis and progressive Robert Law Folliet. Voters chose to keep cool with Coolidge and return the cautious New Englander to office. And here we see the election of 1924. Notice we have Calvin Coolidge, the Republican, running, John Davis, the Democrat, running against him, and we had a third-party candidate at that time who actually won one of the states. Now notice, he was from Wisconsin, and so he did win his home state, but for the most part, this was a victory for Calvin Coolidge defeating the primary opponent, John Davis, the Democrat. And once again, notice that the Republican won the northern states, and the Democratic Party, once again the former Confederate State Party, they primarily won all the votes in the South. Well, that's all I have for you today. Thank you for watching. Before you go, I do have a joke. Why did the can crusher quit his job? Because it was so depressing. Have a nice day.